The streets of Briar Glen carried the weight of silence like a heavy quilt draped over forgotten shoulders. Morning mist clung to the cracked pavement, blurring the outlines of broken porches and leaning fences, as if the town itself was trying to disappear. Amara Langston's boots made a soft crunch against the gravel, too polished, too expensive for a place like this. She didn't belong here, not by any practical measure, but something had pulled her off her private jet and into this nowhere town in the heart of West Virginia. Her assistant had protested. Her board had raised eyebrows, but she'd waved them all off. There was no logic behind it. No scheduled donation, no press event. Just grief. Grief that had followed her like a shadow ever since her mother passed 8 months ago. A grief that success couldn't mute and time refused to dull. Amara was 36, with a tech empire valued at over $10 billion, a face recognized at global conferences, and a name synonymous with innovation. But none of that mattered this morning. Her soul felt like static, like the hollow buzz of an empty radio channel, and she had stepped off that flight not in search of answers, just air. She wandered without purpose, hands deep in the pockets of her tailored coat shoulders, tense against the chill. The town felt forgotten. Store signs faded to illegibility, mailboxes stuffed with yellowing coupons. She passed an old diner with a help wanted sign hanging crookedly in the window, its neon light sputtering like it had given up halfway. Then she heard it, soft, unsure. "Ma'am, do you maybe have something to eat?" She turned. The boy couldn't have been more than 11. Barefoot shirt too big for his bony shoulders, eyes wide and watchful. His skin was dusty, his knuckles white around a crumpled plastic grocery bag. He didn't look up at her. He didn't demand. He didn't reach. Just stood there small and still, like he'd learned that moving too fast made people walk away faster. Amara blinked, caught off guard by the way his presence cut through everything, through the designer clothes, the wealth of the city meetings waiting on hold. She fumbled inside her purse, bypassing the things that said too much about her world, a titanium business card case, a Mont Blanc pen, a compact with the gold AL embossed into its surface. Finally, her fingers landed on a slightly crumbled granola bar, a leftover from a hotel minibar. "Here," she said, offering it gently. The boy didn't snatch it. He didn't even smile. He took it carefully like it might vanish if he held it too hard. "Thank you, ma'am," he whispered, barely audible. But then he didn't need it. He tucked it into the bag and turned away, moving down the alley with quick, purposeful steps. Something in her twisted. She could have left it there. Could have turned and walked back to her car, shaken her head at how strange it all was, and gone back to her curated, polished life. But she didn't. Her feet moved before her brain did. She followed. Not close. Not obvious. Just enough to keep him in sight as he slipped through a narrow cut between two rusted fences. The air shifted. The town fell even quieter. Abandoned bikes crushed cans, a couch that might have once been red. The boy moved with practiced ease, like he'd done this route 100 times, like he knew where every loose board and weak step would be. She followed him around a sagging shed, past a gutted truck with no wheels, until he ducked into a small slanted structure made of tin and weathered wood. It wasn't a house. It wasn't even a trailer. It looked like it might collapse under a stiff breeze. Amara stopped, her breath caught. She didn't know what she expected, but it wasn't this. She moved closer, slowly, carefully. And through the sliver between the panels of the makeshift door, she saw him kneel down inside. Her heart stopped. 3 children were curled together on the dirt floor, silent still, as if the cold had carved them into statues. One of them let out a dry, raspy cough. The boy, the one she had followed, pulled out the granola bar with the kind of reverence reserved for something sacred, and he began to break it, piece by piece, 4 pieces. He gave the first to the smallest, a girl with matted curls and bare feet, then another to a toddler boy whose face was expressionless, another to the 3rd child. He didn't take any for himself. "Chew slow," he whispered. "Don't rush." Amara pressed a hand to her mouth, swallowing the sob rising in her throat. She stepped back from the door, her eyes stinging, her entire body trembling, as if the ground beneath her had shifted. She thought she was just passing through, but she knew with a sudden and terrifying clarity that she had just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She didn't know how long she stood there, frozen outside that broken-down shelter, the cold beginning to seep through the soles of her boots. Part of her wanted to leave to turn away before she got too involved, before her name, her world, her carefully controlled reality got tangled up in something she hadn't meant to find. But her legs didn't move. She couldn't. Something in that boy's quiet, deliberate care had lodged itself inside her chest, like a splinter too deep to pull. She drew a shaky breath and approached again, this time not to hide but to knock. Her hand hovered over the warped wooden panel, fingers trembling. Then gently she knocked twice. The sound was dull, barely audible against the wind. A pause. Then the door creaked open just an inch and one hazel eye appeared in the sliver. The boy. His gaze was guarded but curious, and when he recognized her, the woman from the alley, he didn't speak. He just looked at her for a moment and then stepped aside without a word. Amara ducked beneath the low doorway and stepped inside. The air smelled of wet soil and something sour, the scent of sickness that hadn't been washed out in weeks. The children didn't react to her presence. One of them, the girl, was curled under a tattered blanket, her tiny frame shaking. Another sat cross-legged, chewing on what looked like an old button. The third lay still, eyes open but unfocused. "My name is Amara," she said quietly, crouching down slowly, letting her coat settle against the dusty floor. "Can you tell me yours?" The boy hesitated. He glanced back at the others, as if silently asking permission, or maybe reminding himself why he should still be careful. Then he nodded. "I'm Zeke," he said. "That's Lonnie." He pointed to the smallest, who gave a soft cough in her sleep, and Caleb and Marcus. Amara's heart twisted. "Zeke?" she asked gently. "Where's your mom?" His lips quivered. He looked down at the dirt floor like it might swallow him whole. "She got real sick weeks ago. One morning she just stopped breathing. I ran out to the road, tried to get someone, but nobody came." The words fell out of him flat, without drama or expectation. He wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't asking for anything. He was just saying the truth like it was the weather. Amara swallowed hard. "And your dad?" He didn't even hesitate. Left before Lonnie was born. She sat there trying not to cry, not to let the crushing sorrow flood over her face. "How long have you been taking care of them?" Zeke shrugged, but it wasn't casual. It was resignation. "Since Mama went to the sky." She glanced at the bag in the corner, a few crushed cans, an empty water bottle, a sock with no match. "Where do you get food?" "Sometimes Mr. Vernon at the gas station gives me old bread," he said, "or I find stuff in the woods. Sometimes I don't find anything, but I try not to come back empty." Amara blinked, unable to stop the tears this time. "You've been doing all this by yourself." He nodded again, as if there were no other way, no other option. He wasn't proud. He wasn't broken. He was just tired. She felt like the floor beneath her had vanished. Her whole life, meetings, launches, interviews, summits, all of it seemed absurd now. What did any of that mean compared to this boy who had become mother and father and protector all at once? She took a breath, steadied her voice. "Zeke, if I told you I wanted to help all of you, would you believe me?" He looked at her, then really looked. His eyes weren't wide with hope or excitement. They were wary old in a way a child's eyes should never be. But beneath all that, there was the faintest flicker, not quite belief, but maybe the beginning of it. "I guess I could try," he said softly. Amara exhaled. That was enough. It was everything. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her satellite phone, the one her team insisted she carry for emergencies. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled to the contact list. This wasn't a meeting to schedule or a problem to outsource. This was hers now. As she stood, Zeke stepped beside her, looking up at her face with quiet curiosity. "Are you really going to help?" he asked. She looked down at him, her voice steady for the first time in days. "Yes, Zeke," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." The words lingered in the still air like a promise sworn in blood. "I'm not going anywhere." And she meant it, even if she didn't yet know all that it would require. Amara had made decisions worth millions in seconds. She'd walked out of acquisition deals, signed contracts that shook markets, hired and fired with grace and precision. But this, standing in a crumbling shack with 3 starving children and a boy who barely reached her shoulder, this was the most important decision she'd ever made. And she wasn't going to wing it. Not this time. She stepped outside into the gray light of late morning, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her coat, then dialed the first number that came to mind, Mark, her executive assistant. He picked up on the second ring. "Yes, Ms. Langston. We've been trying to reach Mark," she cut in. "I need you to stop everything you're doing. I need contacts. Now, a pro bono family attorney, someone who knows child welfare law, not just vaguely. I want the best in the state or beyond, and get me a local social worker, someone who actually gives a damn." There was a pause on the other end. "Are you okay?" "No, but I will be. Just get moving. I'll send you my coordinates. We don't have time." Mark didn't ask questions. That's what she'd always liked about him. Next, she called a friend from a nonprofit she had funded years ago, a pediatric nurse who'd once told her if she ever needed help in the field to call. Amara had thought it polite flattery at the time. Now she was cashing it in. By the time she hung up, her breath was visible in the air, and her fingers had numbed, but the adrenaline rushing through her veins kept her rooted to the spot. Inside the shack, she could hear the faint rustling of children and the soft murmurs of Zeke trying to distract Laney with a made-up story. An hour later, headlights cut through the fog as cars and vans began to arrive one by one. A local sheriff's deputy, skeptical at first, turned pale after peering into the shelter. He didn't ask for identification after that, just radioed for backup. Then came Martha, the caseworker, mid-60s, weary eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a voice like sandpaper over velvet. "My God," she whispered as she knelt beside Caleb. "We didn't know. Nobody reported anything. We had no idea there were kids out here." Amara stood beside her, arms crossed, throat tight. "No one's fault. But it won't stay like this." Volunteers brought in blankets, bottled water crackers, and small plush animals someone had clearly grabbed on the way. The kids, hesitant at first, slowly reached for them, as if testing whether this was real or another moment that would vanish. Zeke didn't speak much. He sat beside Laney, holding her tiny hand as the nurse took her temperature and checked her pulse. When she looked up, her brow furrowed. "She's burning up. We need to get her to a clinic now. If we wait too long..." She didn't have to finish. Within minutes, the youngest three were bundled into the back of a van, equipped with emergency supplies. Amara climbed in beside them, brushing the hair from Laney's forehead, whispering, "You're okay now. You're safe." Zeke rode with them, silent, his wide eyes locked on his sister's face the entire ride. At the tiny regional clinic, nearly an hour away, the staff scrambled with a speed and tenderness that surprised her. These V-lines were started. Nutrient-rich fluids administered. And when the doctor confirmed that though malnourished and fevered, the kids would recover, Amara felt her knees weaken with relief. Later that evening, the fluorescent lights in the hallway buzzed faintly as she sat in a hard plastic chair outside the pediatric wing. She stared at the wall phone idle in her lap. Her inbox had over 100 unread emails. Board members were asking questions. Her calendar was a mess. She didn't care. Zeke approached quietly, a juice box in his hand, the plastic straw bent. He sat beside her without a word. After a moment, he said, "They gave Lonnie a bear. She's sleeping now." Amara smiled softly. "Good. She needs the rest." He looked at her, his voice hesitant. "Are you still going to help even after all this?" She turned to him, met his eyes. "Zeke, I've built companies from nothing. I've gone head-to-head with billionaires and walked away standing, but nothing has ever mattered like this. You, your sister, your brothers, you matter. I'm staying. I'm not giving up." And for the first time, his face cracked open into a real shy smile. Just a hint. But it was there, a child slowly allowing hope to sit beside him. Neither of them said anything more. They didn't need to. The promise had already been made, not in words but in presence, and this time someone had stayed. The next morning arrived draped in a cold, pale mist, and Amara hadn't slept. She'd spent the night in a stiff-backed chair next to Laney's hospital bed, watching the rise and fall of the little girl's chest as if her own heart were tethered to it. Every beep from the monitor, every flutter of eyelashes, every soft breath felt like a small miracle she wasn't ready to take for granted. The clinic had done all it could. Lonnie's fever was down. Caleb and Marcus had eaten their first real meal in days, and Zeke had finally let go long enough to fall asleep in the chair beside his siblings. But this was only the beginning, a temporary patch on something far more broken. and Amara knew from the tightness in her chest that she wasn't walking away from this. She stepped out into the corridor just as Martha, the caseworker, arrived holding a clipboard and 2 paper coffee cups. She handed one to Amara, nodding at the dark circles under her eyes. "Black, no sugar," Martha said. "You look like you've been through hell." "I have," Amara replied, then took a long sip. "But not the kind I can walk away from." Martha studied her for a moment, then let out a quiet sigh. "I've seen a lot of people try to fix things with a check. You're different. You stayed." "I'm not here for a photo op," Amara said simply. "I'm here because I found a boy feeding his siblings with a granola bar he didn't eat himself." "That kind of strength, you don't walk away from that." Martha nodded, scribbled something on her clipboard, then softened. "If you're serious about this, about staying involved, you'll need to start with temporary guardianship. Paperwork, home visits, background checks, court petitions. It's not fast, it's not easy, but it's the right way." Amara didn't flinch. "Then give me the forms." And she meant it, because she had made her choice not just for Zeke and the others, but for herself. Over the next few days, the whirlwind began. Amara canceled her return flight and sent a single text to Mark, "Clear my calendar until further notice. This is my priority now." He didn't question it. He just responded, "Understood." She rented a modest guest room at a local motel with peeling wallpaper and a heater that hummed like an old man snoring. But it was close to the clinic, close to the kids. Each day she sat beside them, read books aloud, learned their favorite cartoons, held Laney's hand through fevered nights, and coaxed Marcus to eat when his stomach clenched with fear. Zeke began talking more about his mom, about the woods he'd foraged in, about the time a squirrel stole a whole muffin out of his hand. He had a quiet humor, sharp and quick, and a sense of loyalty that ran deeper than most adults Amara had ever met. "I used to pretend I was the dad," he confessed one afternoon, "but sometimes I'd forget how to act like one. So I'd just talk like cartoons do." It made them laugh. Amara smiled, brushing his hair gently from his forehead. "You did more than enough, Zeke. You kept them alive. You were their world." Zeke didn't say anything, but his eyes shimmered, not quite tears, but something close. Outside the hospital walls, the world kept spinning, but Amara didn't check stock report, didn't call into board meetings, didn't post on social media. Instead, she started researching. She read through state laws on child services, began calling family attorneys, and met with social workers who could help her build a case for long-term care. She wasn't here to rescue. She was here to rebuild. By the end of that week, a plan was already forming. She didn't want to whisk the kids away to some California mansion where nothing was familiar. She wanted them to stay close to the soil they came from, to the trees they knew, to the stories they'd whispered to each other in the dark. She began looking at real estate just outside Briar Glen, a place with space, warmth, and safety. A real home. Because for the first time in years, Amara Langston wasn't searching for meaning. She'd found it in 4 pairs of small hands that had clung to life the best way they knew how. But meaning, she soon realized, came at a cost, one far deeper than she'd expected. The morning Amara submitted the initial paperwork for emergency guardianship, she felt a quiet surge of hope. It was the first real step towards something permanent, something stable. But just 2 days later, that hope met its first wall. A distant cousin of the children, someone no one had ever heard Zeke mention, suddenly appeared with a lawyer and a claim. He wanted custody, claimed he was family, claimed he cared. But Amara could see it in his eyes, the calculation, the opportunism. He knew exactly who she was, and he was circling like a vulture. "I'm just doing what's right," he said, with a polished smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Blood matters." Zeke clung to Amara's coat in that courthouse waiting room, his small body rigid with fear. He didn't speak, but he didn't have to. She knelt to meet his eye. "No one is taking you anywhere without a fight," she whispered. "I promise." So she fought. She hired a private investigator, someone with a soft voice and sharp instincts. Within a week, they'd uncovered records of the cousin's multiple evictions, his gambling debts, and one quiet arrest for neglecting his own daughter years before. Amara's legal team moved fast. But the process wasn't just legal, it was emotional warfare. There were home visits, surprise interviews, psychological evaluations, and endless hours spent with social workers asking questions that dug deeper than any business audit she'd ever endured. She answered them all. Honestly, fiercely, because every night she returned to the new rental home just outside Briar Glen and found four children waiting children who laughed louder now, who slept through the night without waking from nightmares, who started drawing pictures with houses and trees and suns instead of stick figures huddled in the dark. Still, it took its toll. There were days Amara felt like she was drowning in bureaucracy. Days when Laney got sick again and she sat up all night beside her bed, clutching a thermometer and whispering prayers she wasn't sure she believed in. Days when she doubted herself when board members sent emails with polite concern that masked real frustration when news outlets speculated about her mental state, her legacy, her disappearance. And yet she stayed. She stayed when Caleb fell and scraped his knee and wailed like the world had ended until she kissed it and he whispered, "You sound like Mama." She stayed when Marcus insisted on eating cereal with water because milk still felt too fancy. She stayed when Zeke, standing in the hallway one quiet night, said softly, "I don't know what to call you. You're not Mom, but you're something. You can call me Amara," she said gently, "or whatever feels true." He nodded. "Then you're home." She turned away then, not because she didn't want him to see her cry, but because he didn't need to see one more adult falling apart. He needed someone who could hold steady, and that's who she was becoming. Not just a CEO, not just a benefactor, but something braver. Something more ordinary and more extraordinary all at once, the woman who made pancakes with burnt edges, who kept cartoon bandages in her purse, who knew every child's middle name by heart. But even with love and intention, nothing about the fight was simple. Every court appearance reopened wounds. Every letter from social services reminded her how close they'd come to falling through the cracks. And through it all, she kept building not just her case, but their life. A life stitched together from scratch, one choice at a time. And though the cost was high-time reputation certainty, it was nothing compared to what she was gaining. Because every night when she closed the door to the kids' rooms and stood alone in the hallway of their rented house with its half-painted walls and secondhand furniture, she didn't feel hollow anymore. She felt whole. And then one quiet Thursday morning, just as the leaves began to rustle into the first hints of autumn, everything changed. Amara had stopped expecting clarity. Life had become a slow burn of court filings and bedtime stories of school pickups and caseworker check-ins. But that day, standing in the dim hallway of the county courthouse with Zeke holding her hand and Lanny clutching a worn stuffed bear to her chest, she heard the sound she hadn't dared to hope for. The judge's gavel came down with a soft but final thud. Petition for full adoption is granted. Just like that, after months of interviews, home visits, affidavits, and background checks, after countless moments of doubt and hope braided together like barbed wire. It was done. Amara didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat tightened and tears welled before she could stop them. She looked down to see Zeke watching her, unsure, as if trying to gauge whether her tears meant something good or something broken. "They're happy tears," she whispered. Zeke nodded slowly then, in a gesture so small it might have gone unnoticed, leaned his shoulder into hers. No words. Just trust. They walked out of the courtroom, not as charity or case or cautionary tale, but as family. But here was the surprise: Amara didn't take them back to her mansion in California. Everyone assumed she would. Her assistants had prepped the guest wing, a tutor was on standby. Even the kitchen staff was briefed on favorite cereal brands. But Amara canceled it all. Instead, she bought a wide, weathered house just outside Briar Glen, not flashy, but warm. Enough rooms for each child to have a space of their own. A backyard with crooked trees and a creaky swing. A kitchen where the floors groaned, but the windows let in morning light. Because this wasn't about changing who they were. It was about giving them a chance to grow safely into who they could be. She let Zeke pick the paint for his walls a soft navy blue. Caleb and Marcus insisted on bunk beds even though they had their own rooms. Lonnie chose a purple nightlight shaped like a star and refused to sleep without it. There were pancake breakfasts and muddy shoes and marker stains on the couch Amara had once bought secondhand but now refused to replace. They were loud. They were messy. They were home. And Amara, once defined by her precise control over everything, found herself laughing at cereal spills and dancing in the kitchen to music none of them knew the words to. It wasn't perfect. There were still hard nights. Caleb had nightmares. Laney's fever came back once. Zeke struggled with school sometimes, not because he wasn't smart, but because letting go of survival mode wasn't easy. But bit by bit, the weight they carried began to lift. And somewhere in all of it, Amara's own grief softened. Her mother's absence didn't ache quite the same way anymore. There were echoes of her in the way Amara folded blankets or in the way she hummed while brushing Laney's hair. Her mother had once said, "You don't have to change the world all at once. Just don't walk past the part of it that's in front of you." She hadn't. In fact, she'd stopped, looked, stayed. One afternoon while Zeke was doing homework at the kitchen table and the others napped upstairs, he looked up and said, "You know, sometimes I think Mama sent you, like from wherever she is." Amara didn't answer right away. She just smiled, reached out, and brushed his hair back from his eyes. "I think maybe she did too," she said quietly. And in that moment, sunlight on the table crayons scattered across the floor, the scent of tomato soup drifting from the stove. Amara realized something else. She hadn't just saved 4 children from being lost. They had saved her from staying that way. The days that followed moved with a rhythm Amara hadn't known her life could have. There were no ringing conference calls, no keynote addresses, no staff waiting with notepads outside glass-walled boardrooms. Instead, there were sleepy footsteps padding into the kitchen at dawn, mismatched socks, forgotten lunchboxes, and the sound of laughter echoing down hallways she had once only dreamed of filling. She didn't miss her old life, not in the way people expected. She still checked in on her company, the CEO she'd appointed, kept things running with precision, but her focus had shifted profoundly and unapologetically. The woman who once thrived on deadlines now lived by school calendars and dinner conversations. And yet it wasn't just her world that changed. Briar Glen changed too. People started noticing that the clinic had new equipment, that the community kitchen served fresh produce again, that a new after-school program had opened in the church basement run by volunteers, many of whom had once felt helpless and unseen. It wasn't Amara's money that made the shift permanent. It was her presence. She listened. She showed up. She brought in experts not just to write checks, but to teach, to train, to build alongside. Her foundation transformed into a model for grassroots rebuilding, not distant aid but embedded action. And it started with one small boy in a granola bar he hadn't eaten. Zeke thrived in his new school. He was quiet but sharp a reader, a problem solver. His teachers said he had a quiet kind of leadership, the kind other kids followed without even realizing. Caleb and Marcus became inseparable, often mistaken for twins, chasing each other through the house with superhero capes made from bath towels. Laney's cough faded, replaced by the bubbly chatter of a toddler discovering the world word by word. One evening, as Amara stood in the backyard watching the boys build a crooked fort out of cardboard and leftover wood, Laney tugged at her hand. "Can we keep the stars?" she asked, pointing up. Amara knelt beside her. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "The ones in the sky," Lonnie said. "They came when we moved here. I think they followed us." Amara smiled, her heart blooming with the kind of warmth she hadn't felt in years. "Then yes," she said, "we'll keep the stars." Later that night, she stood at the kitchen sink rinsing paint from Zeke's brushes. He'd taken up drawing, mostly sketches of trees and quiet cabins and faces that looked suspiciously like the people in his life. His latest one had been a house surrounded by tall grass and tiny stick figures holding hands beneath a giant scribbled sun. She asked him, "What's this one called?" He shrugged. "It's not a name, it's a feeling." What kind of feeling, he thought for a second, then said, "It's what it feels like to stay." The words hit her so quietly she almost didn't register them at first. But when she did, she had to step away, clutching the towel in her hands, grounding herself. Because he was right. That's what they had all become, not a charity case, not a project, not a tragic headline turned inspirational story, but a family, imperfect, loud, real. And for the first time in her adult life, Amara didn't feel like she had to prove her worth to anyone. She wasn't saving the world. She was holding on to the little piece of it that had been placed in her hands, and that was enough. That night, as she tucked each child into bed, turning off the lights room by room, she paused outside Zeke's door. Inside, he was already asleep, his sketchbook half open on his chest, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. She stood there for a long moment, then whispered into the stillness, "Thank you for letting me stay." And somewhere in the quiet, or maybe only in her heart, she felt an answer rise. You were never meant to leave. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Thank you for watching and for believing that showing up can change everything.